Good morning, and thank you for joining us in the ICE to BEV Strategies for Thriving in the Transition session at CAR MBS 2020. This morning's session is sponsored by ZF. During the session, all audience members will be muted to ensure a quality user experience for everyone participating. Please submit your questions by using the Q&A function. If you have any other questions regarding the virtual MBS experience, please feel free to ask those questions at the information desk in the virtual lobby. Please also take a moment to visit the virtual exhibits in the exhibit hall, and if you'd like to earn CEU or PDH credits for participating in CAR MBS, please visit our MBS page on our website at www.cargroup.org to access the registration link for CEUs or PDHs. Once again, thank you for joining us today. I am pleased to welcome session moderator, Director of Technology Research at the Center for Automotive Research, Brett Smith.
Thank you, Katie, and good morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of the CAR Management Briefing Seminars, this year live from Jimerson Lake, Indiana and Novi, Michigan, I believe. Today's session is from ICE to BEV Strategies for Thriving in the Transition. And I take just a moment to talk about where we were yesterday and kind of where we're going today. And so our first thing is our speakers. And I think both of these speakers, many of you know and have been around the auto industry for quite a while. I've known both of them at least a decade and a half, two absolutely wonderful, fabulous, knowledgeable folks. Michael Robinette, Executive Director of Automotive Advisory Services at IHS Markit, and Sandy Stoikovsky, Chief Executive Officer, North America, and Senior Vice President, Global Injectors Business Unit, TESCO Technologies, LLC. Both of you, Michael and Sandy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Yesterday, we had the session from ICE, Are We There Yet? A propulsion session, or are we there yet? Vehicle electrification outlook. And Dr. Jörg Trompler from ZF and Dustin Kraus from Volkswagen joined me for an hour, and we talked about this industry and how it is shifting towards electrification. And my takeaway from the discussion with those two was, this is an industry that has absolutely gone down the path toward electrification. I think that's an important thing to remember as you think about things like Mary Barra, about a month and a half or 2 months ago, saying, when asked how long it will take, or in 20 years will all cars be electrified, she said it will happen a little bit longer period, but it will happen. So this transition, and that transition is where we want to get to today. Taking a company, a supplier, a propulsion supplier, or the group of suppliers from an internal combustion engine supplier to a vehicle or electrified vehicle supplier. And that brings me back to today's panelists, Sandy and Mike. I think we have two fabulous candidates here to speak about this transition. Michael, as many of you know, has been studying this industry for almost 30 years now, and has been involved deeply in supplier strategy for most of that time, and spent a lot of that time on the propulsion side of the strategy. Sandy, on the other hand, has been on both sides. She's been a consultant. She's been someone that's watched the industry and worked with consulting firms, but she's also spent the last 5, 6, 7 years running companies. And part of her job in running her most recent company at TESCO is, is to transition that to the next stage, to the future. So between the two of those, I think we have a great starting point. And Michael, what I would like to do is let you take over, and you can take over. The bios, as usual, are on the web. If you want bios, you can look at those. We want to keep moving forward. So Michael, if you could take us to the next step.
All right. Can you see a full screen?
Yes. We cannot see the full screen. We can see the PowerPoint setup.
full PowerPoint screen. So excellent. So yeah, thank you so much, Brett, and it's a pleasure to join you on this panel today. This is a topic that's near and dear to our hearts over at IHS Markit. Obviously, our organization as well as industry has been discussing and highlighting the growth of electrification going forward, and as well as other initiatives that are really changing the ecosystem in which we're working within. So I've got a couple of slides to take you through, give you an idea of what our current view is. I know that a little bit later on today, I have a colleague that's going to be talking more about the outlook. Today is really a lot more discussing strategies and how we go forward with that. So if you can see my next slide, hopefully. Brett, can you just confirm, can you see the slide that says?
You're still on the.
Okay. All right, let me try one other thing here. Sorry about that, folks.
Yes.
And try and share something.
No matter how many times we test run it, we're still going to have glitches, Michael. We'll get there.
Let's try this.
Still on the trend, still on the title slide.
Okay. Try this. Apologies.
That says COVID automotive supplier. Oh, you had it there for a moment.
Oh, do we have it? Let me
Yes.
try it again.
Go back to that one and you're good.
Let's try that.
COVID automotive supplier journey.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry, folks. We'll go quickly here. You know, certainly we had this journey where before pre-COVID, the industry was already girding for a lot of the changes that we have been witnessing, but also, as we'll talk about a little bit later, are accelerating what we call this sort of the EV and AV, electrified vehicle and propulsion technology, as well as autonomous technologies, as well as connectivity. You know, certainly moving very quickly and changing the dynamic of our industry. So if you think about that journey, pre-COVID, the industry was already started girding for that. There was already some changes in our ecosystem. Some suppliers were reacting to it. Others weren't reacting quite as quickly. But if you really think about where we've gone through that production shutdown into the restart, and we're almost really past that restart where the industry is moving at least relatively well in North America. And to be honest, the next 4 to 6 quarters are going to be critical. There's a lot going on in our industry. And then I think has been highlighted in sessions yesterday, car sessions yesterday, there's going to be a significant disruption, not only within the OEM side, but certainly the supplier side, as suppliers react to some of the new technologies and also the changing value equation. So certainly it's going to be a more competitive environment, one where we've seen a tremendous amount of capital being taken off the table because of COVID. And the fact that this year is going to be a little bit more challenging from a financial perspective has changed a lot of R&D budgets. And also from our perspective, it's going to change the way that suppliers have to look at strategy. This is just a quick view of what's going on with North American production. And this is essentially our latest production forecast. What's more important here is the fact that our pessimistic scenario is still around 30% likelihood, where obviously our base case is about 50. We don't know what we don't know. We don't have, I would say the industry doesn't have a clear view. Nobody really has a clear view of what a potential, a true second wave and what that impact could be on not only vehicle sales, but the economy in general, not only in North America, but in other parts of the world as well. So there's probably a little bit more of a downside possibility if you look at different scenarios versus an optimistic scenario. But nonetheless, if no matter how you look at this, we're probably looking at least 3 to 4 years to get back up to levels that we witnessed back in 2019, and maybe even a little bit longer to get back to levels that we saw in 2018. So this is going to be a different environment that the supply community is going to have to get used to going forward, with respect to more OEMs, lower capacity utilization, as well as probably a bit more risk in the industry. So when you take a look at where we go in the future, we've also had some changes with respect to product programs. And this is a global look that we use internally at IHS Markit, where we look at a global vehicle launches. And a launch is essentially launching a nameplate at a plant, usually a major or an all-new vehicle at a plant. In other words, suppliers have to deploy assets, people, capital towards supporting those launches. And we saw two impacts. First one was we've already cut tools. We want to launch the vehicle, but obviously we can't get the people and our resources in order, so we need to delay a launch by, let's say, 2 to 3 months. We saw a number of those occur earlier this year, and some of those launches have been pushed out into 2021. Probably more impactful to the industry is going to be those delays in terms of, let's relook at our launch plan. Do we need all these vehicles? We don't have as much capital as we used to. We need to reduce risk. And therefore, we really need to restructure our future portfolio path. And that's obviously having an impact on the supply base. We saw a number of programs that would have launched in, let's say, 2022 or 2023, maybe pushed out a little bit further, where programs are stretched a little bit longer, or the extent has changed, maybe gone from an all-new to a major, where there's not as many changes required in the vehicle, and therefore the capital requirements are reduced. So there's, again, suppliers really need to kind of relook and reevaluate what that future path looks like. You know, a bit of a busy slide. I know that copies of presentations hopefully will be sent out later, but the key here is when you look at electrification, again, the topic that we're talking about today, this journey from ICE to BEV, that journey is different for all three regions, all three major regions, as we call it. So North America, Europe, and China. And when you take a look at North America, obviously low fuel prices, maybe slight changes, some of our regulations may have slowed down the acceptance and the build out of BEV, pure battery electric offerings, but probably augmented to an extent, at least according to our forecast, pre-COVID to post-COVID, what hybrid penetration is going to be. So we see a little bit more hybrid out towards to 2025, and possibly less in terms of BEV, pre to post-COVID. But it's actually a bit opposite in both Europe and China, where their regulatory structure from an emissions perspective is a little bit more difficult and more aggressive. And therefore, with the interruption from COVID, instead of having more of a capability to have an interim step with a hybrid before you move to a BEV, there is some indication that some of those programs are being reduced and then going directly to BEV, given some of the timing and also available capital going forward. So it's interesting. Europe and China will still lead the world from a perspective of BEV technology and hybrid and electrified technology, but nonetheless, North America is going to have to follow suit. The regulations that have just changed with the new SAFE regulations are still increasing, and therefore the industry has to react to it. So any thought of a holiday from an emissions perspective certainly is going to be a bit short-lived. So what do we say suppliers should do? As you stand back and take a look at the situation, it's really understanding, yes, I've gone through this rocky period where we had the production start up and make sure my supply chain was working properly and everything was launched properly. But then now it's more of a view of what's our portfolio look like, what's our book look like, have things changed, what's our competitive set. Interestingly enough, suppliers don't know enough about what their competitors are doing and how are they going to react to some of these changes that COVID has driven. And then as you work through it, what are some of the new dynamics? So we talked just a minute ago about possibly a higher penetration on hybrid with a slightly lower penetration on BEV, at least through 2025. What does that do to supplier strategy and innovation? And then lastly, with all the reduced R&D and innovation budgets that are going to be available, given what happened in 2020, how is that going to roll out, and how will that new ecosystem form? So what we're really looking at, this is a quick graphic of, on the left-hand side, capital and enterprise risk moving up the axis, and then this whole idea of what we call relevance, that ICE to BEV, or level 0 to level 3 in terms of autonomous driving. suppliers will continue to try and reduce risk as best as possible, but continuing to either be relevant from that ICE to BEV structure, and I know that Sandy will talk a little bit about that later, but also from level 0 to level 3, and or are you agnostic to both? And your system that you supply it doesn't matter whether it's ICE or BEV or what level of autonomous capabilities within your vehicle. So again, understanding that dynamic and that journey that suppliers are following through that process is going to be really critical going forward. So just a quick summary, and again, I'm really looking forward to the Q&A a little bit later, but this rebound is going to be, as we've seen, probably a little bit faster in places like China, possibly a bit slower in places like Europe, where North America is sort of running the sort of that middle ground in terms of that rebound. Electrified propulsion and ADAS will continue to move forward. So any thought of governments taking their foot off the accelerator pedal should be dispelled. They'll continue to push forward, especially in Europe and in China, but certainly North America as well. And then the new issues that are arising now that we've had this significant adjustment is what's happening with capacity utilization, or how do I reduce risk in this new environment? And what is my new innovation path? Do I need to take a look at how I'm aligned as a supplier to this new innovation path? And do I have the right resources? Do I have the right partnerships and alliances? These are all critical. And then lastly, this whole idea of launch cadence. There was some discussion yesterday at one of the sessions about this whole idea that budgets have been reduced, and therefore OEMs are really reprioritizing their vehicle and their portfolio and their launch cadence going forward. Suppliers need to react to that. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and look forward to Sandy taking us through some of her observations.
And Sandy, why don't you go ahead and start up?
Okay, just a second here to start my screen.
Yep. Very good. Perfect.
Okay. And great. Well, hello everyone, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. You know, it's clear that we're on a path to clean mobility, and the automotive sector is certainly what I would say is arguably undergoing what is the biggest technology transformation in its history. And, you know, powertrain electrification certainly holds the key to clean mobility, but there are a lot of risks and important bets that we all need to make in order to thrive. So I'm pleased to be here today on behalf of, let's say, a supplier. And I really want to share with you today our approach as one example to what we hope is proactively transforming amid this transition instead of reactively being transformed during this transition of electrification. And while we aren't the only supplier going through this, for sure not, I think it's a great idea, therefore, to have such a panel like this. And I just want to say thanks to you, Brett, and to Carr for having me. So to set the context, allow me first to tell you who is TESCO Technologies. TESCO Technologies is a leading global powertrain technology supplier in the auto industry. While the name may be new to some of you, we're actually the powertrain subsidiary of Continental. So, you know, you used to hear Continental Powertrain. That's us. We're now known as TESCO Technologies. And the reason for the new name, later in the future, we'll be going through a spin-off from Continental, and therefore it was important to have our own identity and name as we go through this. So, you know, with about $8.5 billion in sales, if I convert these euros, and over 40,000 employees worldwide, TESCO Technologies is by no means new to this space. You know, we've undergone, let's say, the electrification pathway even 10 years ago or so. And, you know, it's kind of funny to think about. It was almost the exact same time, Brett, that you had me here at the management briefing seminars and the powertrain forum. And I remember I said something that actually made headlines, which was, I said, hey, you know, there's been this race between VHS being the internal combustion engine and beta being electrification. And I said, for sure, beta or electrification would win. It was just a question of when. And it's hard to imagine that only 11 years ago we were debating exactly that, because it seems so obvious now. So hopefully your audience here knows what VHS and beta are. If not, you can look it up. So let's say we, myself and the company, really believe that the future will be electrified. And the TESCO Technologies intends to play a leading role in that. Of course, adoption rates, you know, whether it be due to something like COVID or other issues, you know, adoption rates and the scale up of capacity is extremely important for a global manufacturer. And so, you know, the real idea here is positioning ourselves, therefore, to play a leading role in the electrified future is somehow going to require us, and has required us, to really reconsider our strategy. And so I'm going to share some of that story here today. And since Michael certainly started with some of the regulatory picture, I just want to cover a bit about the consumer. While in many regions, environmental regulations and space constraints are big purchase indicators for people, but in the US, you know, these really aren't the same thing. And so as we think about what electrification in the US market might mean, it's going to follow a more natural path, which means following what consumers would normally want to do. And I believe that the US is in fact a performance-driven market. The consumers in the US prioritize price, convenience, and performance. And so, you know, whether you're thinking about, you know, 34% of consumers will not pay more for an EV, or 58% willing to wait a whole 15 to 30 minutes to charge their vehicles for 200-mile range. That's in contrast to the average today is about 7 to 11 hours for that range. Or if you think about our market being somehow around 70% or so of trucks and SUVs, it means that electrification in this market really has to satisfy customers around trucks and SUVs and add even to the performance of those vehicles, rather than being somehow zero emission driving utility vehicles. So with that perspective, you know, it really means that in this market, we would see a healthy mix in the future of internal combustion engines, hybrid electric vehicles, and electric vehicles to definitely prevail in the midterm. Where even the electrification goes towards performance. This is different than the more regulatory driven growth that we'll be seeing globally, but either way, since hybrids and full EVs are at some sort of low level of sales currently, this means that there will be a lot of growth from electrification. And so looking at all this growth from electrification, this definitely has implications for a desirable future portfolio. And from our perspective, we said we have to really get active with our portfolio changes. We have to deal with this now so that we're ready in the future when the volume of these products are needed. So this is actually a transformation that we've gone through starting back in 2018. If you look at what our business looked like back then, you see our sales represented by 3 colors here, gray being what we now call non-core business, blue being the core business, and green being emerging technologies or electrification technologies. And, you know, thinking about how we're changing actively, you know, we're exiting those products that don't have a medium and long-term growth horizon. These are things like high pressure fuel pumps and injectors. Those were big parts of our business, as you can see, and in the future, not so much. Furthermore, we're doubling down on electrification, or areas where our systems and electronics expertise can drive growth, including technologies like belt starter generator, battery management systems, onboard chargers, inverters, and the like. And then very important, we're continuing to support and grow our core business. Business which includes products like engine and transmission control units and sensors and actuators. So as you look at the graph on the right-hand side, then you see a very different mix of sales that we would have in the future. And it's with a diminished portion on these non-core, a stronger and healthy core in the blue, and then a lot of growth in the green electrification areas. And then for Vitesco, the impact of these portfolio changes looks like this. And I'm not going to go into detail here. You can read for yourself. But a few points to make. Gone is the gray area for the non-core. So this is no longer part of the portfolio. And this was somehow even a painful choice for us because it involved a lot of change and some plant closures. But with the full benefit now of all of our resources, we're focused on technologies ranging from this core blue ICE solutions all the way through full EV solutions in the various shades of green, all of which have a mid to long-term growth perspective. So this is now what we see as a healthy portfolio, with a goal being that Vitesco is present at every stage in the spectrum. And now, why would we do that? Why would we go to the point of having a full spectrum when maybe you could focus on a few things? And the reason is, you know, we've been in this business for a while, introducing electrification in the powertrain for years now. And, you know, nobody's crystal ball is perfect. And as a global company, we have to make returns on the investments we make. And this means being ready with the right products at the right time and the right volume. And so as we continue to look forward to the future, we're looking at offering solutions that are technology neutral and really thinking in scenarios. And this gives us the basis to be prepared and agile for all possibilities. But, you know, it's not just portfolio changes alone that we need to make. For Vitesco, ensuring that we're actively transforming meant also making some corporate structural changes too. And the first step in this process actually began in January of 2019, and that was with our carve out. And this was an important step because it gave us the independence from Continental through this carve out and gave us dedicated leadership that was focused solely on the unique needs of our propulsion customers. On top of that, we launched a unique identity. You know, Vitesco as a name is obviously not familiar to a lot of people. It actually derives from the Latin word vita, which means life and represents energy, speed, and agility. And, you know, so this has been really important, not just as a name, but really as an identity around what's going to be needed in the future. Furthermore, we've made sure to include our employees through this transformation, preparing the workforce with the required skill sets demanded by electrification, as well as this fast changing environment. We really have to skill our employees for both of those angles. And then finally, it culminates in the completion of our spin-off, which was actually supposed to be this fall, and we've delayed it while we wait for a better external environment. You know, COVID has certainly made us have a little pause there, but we will spin off as soon as the market is able to respond as well. And the key theme among all of these is really that each decision has been all about enabling greater speed and flexibility, because we see this as absolutely what's necessary in a healthy company going forward. So in summary, you know, there's really 5 key points that I just talked about within the presentation. Ones where we have to actively shape this transformation in order to be successful. For us, it was responding to the technology transformation with a long-term strategy. You know, whatever that is for you. For us, it was to be a leader in clean mobility, but for others, it could be to be a consolidator within the combustion engine technologies. Each company has to choose their way. Furthermore, anticipating customer needs and consumer needs and regulations so that we can have these scalable, market-driven solutions, even including performance. Having that intelligence then feed its way into a clear product strategy, taking decisive, even difficult decisions so that we would have this strong core and a growing business, enabling the reallocation of resources to these future growth areas through development, and then finally, having a healthy foundation of a fast and flexible business structure so that we can continue to respond into the future. So this is a little bit about our story so far against the overall backdrop that Michael showed. You know, I believe that every powertrain company in this space has or will go through a kind of strategic rethinking here. And our idea is to use the above 5 points to be able to transform rather than be transformed. I do look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Sandy, thank you so much. If you want to stop sharing your screen, that would be good. When you and I spoke, I think last year at the Propulsion North American International Conference in Chicago, we started talking about this. When we talked, Sandy would be the perfect person to come to this session and talk about this, because you can truly bring the story of what that change means. And you did a wonderful job laying that out. Thank you so much. That was really right on spot. And Michael, you've had that chance over time to watch other companies go through this. So I think that the two of you are really a perfect pair to talk us through this. A couple of housekeeping things. Curiously enough, as we're sitting here talking about electrification and the transition, there's a V8 ski nautique going zipping back and forth outside my window. And that sound of a V8 is such a great sound. So yeah, even as we transition, just to hear that rumble of the V8 out there. Questions. Remember, questions in the Q&A, not in the chat. Sandy and Michael, you can view those questions online as you're looking, and you can go through them and build those questions into your responses as we talk, or into our discussions. Otherwise, we probably won't get to all the questions, but if we can keep an eye on what's happening with those, we can make sure we try to respond to everybody and get things resolved. Michael, you and I, over the last several months, have been working together on looking at how this supply base transitions. One of the things that I think has been interesting in the discussions with you is understanding people look at safe regulation and think that, oh, that means the spigot's turned off for North America. That means we don't have that much pressure on us anymore, at least for 5 or 6 more years. What do you respond to? How do you respond to that?
I think that's sort of patently untrue. You know, any supplier that is going to stand back and say, oh, well, the regulations have been weakened, I don't need to continue with the same innovation path and or resources I was going to focus on answering the call of increased hybridization and electrification. That would be foolish. We truly are a global automotive ecosystem. For a lot of different reasons, China and Europe are going to lead in terms of introduction of both BEV, but also even hybrid technologies. And Sandy had an excellent portrayal of some of those technologies as they work their way through and increase the level of electrification. But North America has to be part of that equation. You've got global OEMs that are building here. So they're not going to design a completely different vehicle for North America if it's also built in China and or Europe. That's one aspect. And then at some point down the road, ours in North America, the emissions regulations may catch up towards the end of the decade. That could be something we can discuss a bit later. But nonetheless, anybody who takes their foot off the accelerator, in our opinion, would be foolish. You have to set yourself up for success.
And Michael, you and I had been working on a paper together. Is that posted yet?
Yes, there's we'll have it out on LinkedIn, and I know it's already on our IHS Market Advisory site. So there's Brett, joint paper that both IHS and CAR built, really understanding that transition from ICE to BEV, but also that there's a strategy reboot that's really required through this whole process. And you can tell companies like Sandy's are all about that in terms of we need to revise and relook at how this industry is going to unfold.
Sandy, you are a North American, head of North American operations for TESCO. How do you communicate back to the home office at Conti in TESCO, Germany, about this market compared to other markets? What's that conversation like as you talk to them?
Yeah, well, first of all, I was in Germany until last summer. I spent the first couple years with Continental in Regensburg, Germany, which is where our headquarters are. And that was very important for establishing some of the key relationships, because this is still a relationship business. No matter how much of an engineering company we are, it's still all about relationships. But what we've done as a company worldwide within our overall strategic direction is to establish certain goals that we have. And this does include market diversification, as well as some other aspects regarding electrification. And this gives us a really nice hook kind of to be able to talk with, let's say, the home office, to be able to say, hey, here are the unique requirements for our market. Here's what the customers in our backyard, so to speak, here are needing, and what's unique about our market. And let's make sure that the requirements that we have and our customers have, therefore, are fully baked in to our modular, scalable platforms. Because if they are, then we can tailor them well into the marketplace. But if they're not in there from the beginning, then you obviously have a situation where you can't meet the demand. So this is our principal hook, is our overall alignment around our strategic direction and the goal of having market diversification.
Thank you. Michael, when we look forward to the transformation that Sandy is going through with Vitesco, with other companies, what do you see a supplier looking like, a propulsion supplier, in 5, 7, 8 years? Are they vastly different? Are they broader in scale? Are they narrower in scale? Are they global? Are they regional? What differences? What are the trends that you see as you work with these companies?
It'll be tough to sort of peanut butter it and basically say everybody's going to follow a certain path.
What are some good examples or directions?
Yeah, no, I think that certainly if you look ahead, suppliers are going to look at whether they're properly vertically integrated. Do they have the right technologies in terms of being a differentiator? I think that is critical. Can you as a supplier differentiate your capability in the future, or are you just another me too? That I think in some respects is going to be critical. Also, how strong is your upstream supply base? Do you have the right suppliers feeding into you, and do you need to go out and seek new ones? And then lastly, a lot of suppliers still have to get their arms around. Maybe there's a partnership or an alliance that I need to bring to bear to speed this along, or to add a new capability to really finish off this system. And a lot of times we've been an industry of, well, we'll do it ourselves, but frankly, suppliers just don't have the luxury of time and resources and the risk that would associate with it to do it themselves. So what's a supplier look like? I think they're probably going to be, interestingly enough, a little bit more global, but with local capacity, and then also be a little bit more of a system-oriented supplier, given the fact that will give them a little bit more flexibility to react to different market dynamics.
Sandy, Michael brought up the challenge of resources, financial resources. As Vitesco has spun out from Continental, Continental was a very full-range vehicle manufacturer, component manufacturer. Now it's not bits and pieces, but broken into smaller pieces. Has the ability for Vitesco to focus solely on vehicle electrification and propulsion helped in terms of financially focusing your resources, as opposed to some other companies that are broader that have to pull some into automated, connected, some into propulsion, and kind of spread those out? Has it been easier for you to focus?
Well, allow me to clarify. So we have carved out from Continental, which means we have a separate operating unit with it, but we have not spun off yet.
Yes.
But yes, it is true that by carving out, it's kind of the first step in being able to just solely focus on the unique propulsion needs. And, I think that's what's kind of hard about this current situation, is you feel like you have to do everything. You feel like you have to keep investing in all the internal combustion activities. You feel like you have to have the right strategic bets in electrification. And this sounds like you have to do everything. And that's why it was so important for us to make some cuts in what we were doing. And that's how we made the decision, was really around deciding to cut the areas of our portfolio around injectors and high pressure fuel pumps, was based on the idea that we can't do everything. And therefore, the only things we're going to do are those things that have a mid to long-term growth perspective. We're going to stop doing those things that do not have that, therefore. And this is a step towards exactly the question that you're raising, Brett.
Good. Michael, your thoughts on this split for companies, this challenge of spreading their R&D, their advanced work over so many areas. How are suppliers surviving that right now, in this, especially in this downturn?
Well, it's interesting. You've got your mega tier ones that we call it. So, for instance, I would certainly put Continental into that space. Your Eichens of the world, your Delphi's, those types of companies that are, Magna, et cetera, that have multi-streams. They're not only into propulsion, but they're also into other sectors of businesses. And so you're right. Capital gets spread out between those different areas. I think that the smarter companies, though, know where they need to spend their R&D and their innovation dollars. And let's face it, the industry is transforming. The value equation of the vehicle is transforming more towards the electrified propulsion system, more towards autonomous drive and the value that brings to customers, as well as the safety. So, suppliers are going to have to apply those factors when they determine what their R&D and their resource budgets are for the future. And do they have the right people? And do they have the right alliances? These are all going to be questions that have to be sort of recalculated in a strategy reboot.
So I want to drill down a bit, because I think it's interesting what you said on having to focus on those things. Have you noticed the companies that you've talked to in the last 4 months pulling back on certain things, or pushing, deep diving into other things? Or has it just kind of been, okay, we'll pull back broadly, but keep moving forward? Are there areas that you've seen where they're saying generally the industry is pulling back on, areas where they're going forward?
I think you make a good point. A lot of suppliers are following what their customers are doing. If their customer, obviously the OEM has said, I'm going to change the cadence of when I'm going to launch some of these vehicles, and therefore the technology is required. So then the supplier is going to say, well, I want to reduce risk as well. So I'll probably focus a little bit more on near to midterm initiatives and innovations that can come to the market a little bit more quickly. And this longer term initiative that had a little bit more risk to it, but we felt really could eventually pay off, I'm probably going to reduce my resources towards that or suspend it until I have a better view of how this market's going to come back. So there's going to be risk in doing even that, but suppliers have to reallocate and adjust their expectations.
Thanks, Michael. Sandy, I want to go back to something. You've talked about the transformation. You've talked about the challenges. You've been deep in it for several years now. What is it your customers don't understand about what the supply base is going through in this transformation, specifically in the propulsion side of it? And why should they care, or should they care?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure there's anything they don't understand. They're in it too, let's say, and we're deeply engaged as a partner with our customers. So, I believe they understand the situation quite well. But maybe layers below that, there's a message that hasn't really gotten through, and that is, if you look at a lot of the market data, such as what Michael was showing, what you see in some cases is sort of this nice flat line. Okay, now we have COVID, and then it doesn't look or feel like such a big transformation. It kind of looks all like a plateau. It looks smooth, and the reality is that underneath it, it's far from that, because you have maybe 3 transformations going on at the same time, where you say, in some cases, you walk into something and it's some kind of turnaround business activity because things weren't perhaps taken in the right direction in the past. And then sometimes when you decide a turnaround isn't worth it, then you end up needing to turn it into a restructuring. So it can look like that. And then other areas you have a full-on startup going on within a big company. And then still in others, you can have this, very successful and strong business. And so as you kind of look at this, you say there's areas of the business that are going down and you want them to go down because you're phasing out. You've got other areas that are strong and you really want to maintain them. And then you've got others where it's fundamentally a startup. And so what I'm not sure the OEMs see it so much is just how much churn there is under the water with regard to that.
Michael, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I would agree. I mean, I think OEMs are asking for certain technologies and they expect them to be there, but much like what Sandy was saying, sometimes the scale is not there, and the technology has not been completely proven out. In some cases, so OEMs have to sometimes adjust their expectations. Do they want to be a leader or maybe a fast follower? And I think that that's an important distinction.
A couple of times I've heard each of you mention the skills and the right people and the right person, or the right types of skill sets. Sandy, as you've gone through this transformation at TESCO, when you look at people in the engineering side and in the plant floor side, what are the skills that you think are really new and interesting and important? Or is it just a tweaking of the skill set? Do we need new workforce? Do we need to retrain the old workforce? Do we just need to nudge the current workforce?
Well, it's both. The reality is in our manufacturing environments, and I'll start there, we have such highly automated activities there. And if you're talking automation, you're talking about electronics and software, as well as the mechanicals necessary to enable that to work. And so you would say electrification is already here in the manufacturing environment for sure. So then, yes, there is some know-how that's specific to the product in the manufacturing side. And of course that needs to transform as you think about, making highly electrified products and the unique capabilities there. So there are challenges of, let's say, skill development that are necessary. Also then over on the R&D or engineering side, as we would talk about it, this is where I would say the larger task is for skill redeployment. And so we've gone through a very strong activity of essentially upskilling thousands of people worldwide, moving them from mechanical-based know-how into electronics and software. And this kind of electrification academy approach is happening differently in each region based on what avenues are available. But this is absolutely necessary in the R&D world and a little bit less so in the manufacturing side. But across the board, we've seen it as a challenge. And by going through this activity, we're able to ensure that there's a future for our people as well.
Good, thanks. So we are actually running out of time. So let's do a couple of things in closing. There were several questions throughout this list, and I've been trying to go through them and summarize them. A lot of them have to do with the transition of BEV, ICE to BEV, and some of that in-between stuff. Michael, as you look at this mix specifically in the US over the next several years, one refers to clean technologies. What are other options than battery electric vehicles? What are your views, your thoughts on how that transition of technologies from 12 volt stop start through 48 volt through plug-in hybrids, that whole range, where do you see that playing a role in the States, US over the next several months, years?
Well, I think there's no doubt, Brett, that we've seen several OEMs, whether it be Ford or GM or Toyota, launch BEV offerings. But for the most part, those BEV offerings are either luxury focused, capability focused, or performance focused. In terms of a mass market BEV for basically for running around town, You know, there are a couple of those, but those aren't the primary role of what's being launched over the next 4 or 5 years. To be honest with you, it's gonna be about that journey as the OEMs work through every one of their vehicles and what their technology path is going to be required to meet the emission standards, whether it be not only in North America but certainly in Europe and in China. As they work through the process, they'll pick what they feel to be the most efficient process or most efficient technology to meet their needs. But they're also going to have a view to the future that says, well, I picked that, but it doesn't set me up very well for the next cycle. So I think that there's going to be obviously a view of what's going on right now and in the near term, but does it set themselves up for a differentiation in the future? And so that's, you know, this whole idea of BEV penetration, I think is obviously a big issue, but it's not really so much about that. It's about how OEMs are going to employ those other hybrid technologies through that journey as they work through the emissions regulations.
And Sandy, for your company, you showed earlier, but you've clearly got a step function to get there as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely, because we need to meet our customers where they want to go, and each of our customers have different strategies on their journey. So, you know, some are very gung-ho, mild and full hybrid, and others not at all. So we need to have solutions for all of them.
All right, so the closing thing, in a year from now, when we get back together and do this in Traverse City, right?
Yes, please.
In Michigan, when we're all in a room together instead of looking at each other virtually, thinking ahead 12 months, we hope COVID's something that's in the back rearview window at least. What's the big change in transformation, the big change in suppliers, Sandy, from your point, in your own personal journey with your company through there? What do you think is going to be a big step or a big thing that happens in the next 12 months for your company as you move forward?
Well, I know where we'll be as a company, and because we've laid out our strategy, and the key difference next year versus this year, we hope the markets will have returned in some way. So our spinoff would have been officialized at that point. From maybe more of a technology perspective, we'll have been in a position to make some very key announcements about upcoming technologies that we're currently developing. So looking forward to that.
And so, Michael, by then, the ID4 will be out, the Mach-E will be out, the Model Y will be out through kind of the downturn. We'll have that next generation of really interesting battery electric vehicles. Where do you think we're all going to stand in a year from now?
There's certainly some are going to take off and do well, and others are going to lag somewhat. But if we look at a year from now, I think the real story is going to be how well does some suppliers transition? Did they handle the COVID issue and the fact that they need to transform on an ICE to BEV as well as level 0 to level 3? Did they handle all those balls in the air properly and come out the other side as a truly differentiated supplier and player within the automotive ecosystem? And I think that some are going to do very well at that, and others probably not quite so well. So there may be some consolidation that may occur as well over the next 12 to 18 months.
And Sandy's going to come back and tell us how successful they were at their implementation, right? Both of you, I really appreciate you joining me. This is exactly the kind of discussion I was hoping for. I think it is so important that we talk about getting from here to there, but actually doing the work to get there. And Sandy, you've been doing that on a daily basis for years. Michael, you've been watching and contributing to that as we go forward. Thank you both, and thank you all for listening. Have a great day.
Thank you.